The white dress hung perfectly on her shoulders, every pearl sewn exactly where it should be. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hotel's bridal suite, surrounded by flowers that cost more than most people spend on their car. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but inside her heart was racing for all the wrong reasons. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. That's what everyone kept telling her. Her mother had been planning this wedding for months, maybe even years. The guest list had grown from 50 close friends to over 200 people she barely knew. The venue was the most expensive in town, with crystal chandeliers and marble floors that echoed every footstep. She could hear the wedding march starting to play through the thick walls. 200 people were sitting out there, waiting for her to walk down that long aisle. Her father was probably adjusting his tie right now, getting ready to walk her to the altar. Her bridesmaids were lined up outside the door, holding their matching bouquets, whispering about how beautiful everything looked. But she couldn't move. Her feet felt like they were glued to the carpet. The more she looked at herself in that mirror, the more she felt like she was looking at a stranger. This wasn't her. This wasn't what she wanted. This wasn't the life she had dreamed of when she was younger. Her phone buzzed on the small table next to her. Another text from her cousin asking if she was ready. Ready for what? Ready to promise forever to someone who felt more like a roommate than a soulmate? Ready to live the life everyone else thought she should want? She thought about James, her soon-to-be husband, standing at the altar in his perfectly pressed tuxedo. He was a good man. Everyone said so. He had a stable job at the bank, drove a reliable car, and never forgot to take out the trash. He was exactly what her parents wanted for her. Safe, predictable, boring. They had been together for 3 years, and she couldn't remember the last time he had surprised her. Not in a good way, anyway. Their conversations were always about practical things. Bills, schedules, what to have for dinner. When was the last time they had talked about their dreams? When was the last time he had made her laugh so hard her stomach hurt? The wedding dress suddenly felt too tight. The room felt too small. She could hear people moving around in the hallway, probably looking for her, wondering why she wasn't ready yet. Her mother would be having a panic attack about now. The photographer was probably checking his watch, worried about the schedule. She walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot below. Her old car was sitting there, the same beat-up sedan she had driven since college. Someone had tied white ribbons to the mirrors as a joke during her bridal shower last week. Just married was still written on the back window in washable paint. That car represented freedom to her. It had taken her on road trips with friends, to job interviews in different cities, to places where she could be herself without anyone's expectations weighing her down. Now it just sat there, decorated like everything else for a day that didn't feel like hers. The music got louder. Someone knocked on the door. "Sweetheart, are you ready?" "It's time," her father's voice called through the wood. Time, such a funny word. Time to get married. Time to settle down. Time to be responsible. But what about time to live? Time to figure out who she really was? Time to find someone who loved her for her messy, imperfect, real self? She thought about all the conversations with friends who told her she was lucky to find someone like James. "He's such a catch," they would say. "You're so lucky he wants to settle down." But she didn't feel lucky. She felt trapped. The knock came again, more urgent this time. "Honey, everyone's waiting, everyone." 200 people who had bought gifts and taken time off work and dressed up in their best clothes, to watch her make the biggest mistake of her life. How could she disappoint all those people? How could she waste all that money? How could she embarrass her family like that? But then she thought about disappointing herself, about waking up every morning next to someone who felt like a stranger, about pretending to be happy for the next 50 years, about never knowing what real love felt like. Her hands started shaking. The bouquet on the table suddenly looked ridiculous with its perfectly arranged roses and baby's breath. Everything was so perfect, so planned, so fake. Just like her smile had been for the past few months when people asked if she was excited about the wedding. She walked back to the mirror one more time. The woman looking back at her wasn't the person she used to be. This wasn't the girl who had wanted to travel the world, who had dreamed of writing stories, who had believed in fairy tale love. This was someone who had given up her dreams to make everyone else happy. The music stopped for a moment, then started over again. They were waiting for her, probably wondering what was taking so long. Her phone buzzed again, then again. Messages from bridesmaids, from family members, from friends who had traveled from out of town. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the messages. Everyone was so excited. Everyone except her. She was the only one who seemed to realize this was all wrong. That's when it hit her like a lightning bolt. She didn't have to do this. She didn't have to walk down that aisle just because everyone expected her to. She didn't have to marry someone just because he was safe and reliable. She didn't have to live someone else's idea of a perfect life. Her heart started beating faster, but this time it was different. This time it was excitement mixed with terror. This time it was the feeling of making a choice that was completely her own. She looked around the room one more time. The expensive dress, the perfect makeup, the flowers that would die in a few days. None of it mattered. What mattered was being true to herself, even if it meant disappointing everyone else. She grabbed her purse and the car keys she had left on the dresser. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was from adrenaline, not fear. She was actually going to do this. She was actually going to choose herself over everyone else's expectations. The music was playing again. People were probably getting restless in their seats. Her father was probably pacing outside the door, wondering what was wrong. But for the first time in months, she knew exactly what she needed to do. She took one last look in the mirror, smoothed down her dress, and walked toward the door. But instead of opening it, she walked past it to the side exit that led directly to the parking lot. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. This was the moment that would change everything. She was about to become the woman who ran away from her own wedding. She was about to disappoint a lot of people. She was about to cause the biggest scandal her family had ever seen. But she was also about to save herself from a lifetime of regret. And that made every scary step worth it. She pushed open the door and stepped into the afternoon sunlight, her wedding dress flowing behind her as she walked toward her car and toward whatever came next. The parking lot felt like a different world compared to the fancy hotel behind her. Cars were lined up in neat rows and the sun was beating down on the hot asphalt. She could still hear the wedding music playing through the building's walls. But it sounded distant now, like it belonged to someone else's life. Her dress was already getting dirty from the walk across the pavement. The long train kept catching under her feet, and she had to hold it up with one hand while digging through her purse for her car keys with the other. Her heart was still racing and she kept looking over her shoulder, expecting someone to come running after her. Where was she even going to go? She hadn't thought that far ahead. All she knew was that she needed to get away from this place, away from all those people waiting for her to do something she didn't want to do. The car keys felt heavy in her shaking hands as she approached her old sedan. Someone had tied white ribbons all over her car during the bridal shower, and now they looked silly, flapping in the breeze. The just married sign painted on her back window seemed like a cruel joke now. She wasn't getting married today. She wasn't walking down any aisle. She was running away from the biggest day of her life, and she had no idea what came next. The car felt familiar and safe after spending the morning in that formal hotel room. She threw her bouquet onto the passenger seat and tried to figure out how to sit down without completely ruining her dress. The layers of fabric seemed to have a mind of their own, puffing up around her like a white cloud. Her phone started buzzing like crazy. Text after text was coming in. She could see her father's name, her mother's name, her sister's name. Even James was calling now. She turned the phone face down on her lap. She couldn't deal with that right now. She needed to focus on getting out of here. The engine started on the first try, which felt like a small miracle. Everything else in her life was falling apart, but at least her reliable old car was working. She adjusted her rearview mirror and put the car in reverse, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline. That's when everything went wrong. She had been so focused on getting away, so overwhelmed by what she had just done, that she completely forgot to check behind her. The heavy veil attached to her hair was making it hard to see clearly, and the layers of dress fabric kept sliding around on the seat. The sound of metal hitting metal was loud and horrible. Her car jerked to a stop and she felt her stomach drop to her feet. She had hit something, or someone had hit her. Either way, this day just kept getting worse. She sat frozen in her driver's seat for a moment, staring at her hands on the steering wheel. Could this really be happening? Had she really just crashed her car while trying to escape her own wedding? The universe seemed to have a twisted sense of humor. Through her side mirror, she could see a man getting out of a black SUV behind her. He looked tall and had dark hair, and he was moving around his vehicle to check for damage. She could see camera equipment scattered across his back seat, expensive-looking lenses and bags that had probably been perfectly organized before she crashed into him. This was a disaster. A complete disaster. Not only had she just ruined her own life by running away from her wedding, but now she had probably ruined some stranger's day too. And from the look of all that camera gear, he was probably a professional photographer who needed his car to work. The man walked around to the front of his SUV, and she could see him examining the damage. His front bumper was dented and there were scratches along the side. Her car probably didn't look much better. She was going to have to get out and face this even though she was wearing a wedding dress and probably looked like she had lost her mind. She turned off her engine and took a deep breath. Through her cracked rear window, she could see the man looking confused as he tried to figure out what had happened. He probably wasn't expecting to find a runaway bride in the driver's seat of the car that had just hit him. When she finally opened her car door and stepped out, the full absurdity of the situation hit her. Here she was, in a wedding dress that cost more than some people's rent, standing in a hotel parking lot next to two damaged cars, about to explain to a complete stranger why she had just fled her own wedding and crashed into his vehicle. The man approached her slowly, probably trying to figure out if she was having some kind of breakdown. His eyes were kind but concerned, and she could tell he was trying to process what he was seeing. A bride, at a wedding venue, crashing into cars instead of walking down the aisle. "Are you okay?" he asked, which wasn't the question she was expecting. She thought he would be angry about his car, or confused about why she was there, but instead he seemed genuinely worried about her. She looked at him for a moment. This stranger who had somehow gotten tangled up in the worst decision of her life. He was probably in his 30s, dressed nicely but not formally, with camera gear that suggested he worked at events like this. Maybe he was even supposed to be photographing her wedding right now. "I think I'm supposed to ask you that," she said, gesturing toward his damaged SUV. "I'm the one who hit you." He glanced back at his car, then at her, then at the hotel behind them where wedding music was still playing. She could tell he was putting the pieces together, figuring out that she was the bride who was supposed to be inside getting married right now. "Well," he said after a moment, "I've been to a lot of weddings, but this is definitely a first." Despite everything that had happened, despite the mess she had just made of her life, she found herself laughing. It started as a small chuckle, but then it grew into real laughter, the kind that comes from pure relief and the absurdity of a situation that couldn't possibly get any worse. "I'm so sorry about your car," she said when she finally caught her breath. "This is not how I planned my day going." "I'm guessing this wasn't part of the wedding timeline," he said, and she could hear a hint of humor in his voice. He didn't seem angry, which was more than she deserved after crashing into him. She looked back at the hotel where people were probably starting to realize something was wrong. Soon they would come looking for her, and they would find her here in the parking lot having crashed her car while trying to run away. The thought of facing all those disappointed faces made her feel sick. "I don't suppose," she said, turning back to the stranger, "you'd be willing to give me a ride somewhere that isn't here?" It was a crazy thing to ask. She knew it was crazy. But she also knew that she couldn't go back into that hotel, couldn't face all those people, couldn't pretend that everything was fine when her whole world had just changed. He looked at her for a long moment, probably trying to decide if she was completely out of her mind. Then he looked at his car, at her car at the hotel where her abandoned wedding was still waiting to happen. "Where do you want to go?" he asked simply, and that's when she realized she had absolutely no idea. He stood there looking at her for what felt like forever, probably trying to figure out if helping a runaway bride was the smartest decision he could make today. She didn't blame him for hesitating. She was a complete stranger who had just crashed into his car while fleeing her own wedding. That had to be a red flag in anyone's book. "You really don't know where you want to go?" he asked, glancing back at the hotel where voices were starting to get louder. Someone was definitely looking for her now. "Honestly, anywhere but here," she said, gathering up the endless layers of her dress. "I just need to get away from this place before they find me and try to drag me back inside." He looked at his damaged SUV, then at her cracked car, then at her standing there in thousands of dollars worth of wedding dress looking completely lost. She could see him making some kind of decision in his head. "Okay," he said finally, "but we should probably move fast. It looks like your wedding party is about to come looking for you." She turned to see her sister and two bridesmaids coming out of a side door of the hotel. still holding their bouquets and looking around frantically. Her heart jumped into her throat. She wasn't ready to face them yet. She wasn't ready to explain what she had done or why she had done it. "Please," she said to the stranger, and she could hear the panic in her own voice. Without another word, he walked over to his SUV and opened the passenger door for her. "Come on. We can figure out the destination on the road." She practically ran to his car, her dress trailing behind her like a white flag of surrender. Getting into the SUV while wearing a wedding dress was like trying to stuff a cloud into a box. But somehow she managed to squeeze all the fabric inside and pull the door closed, just as her sister started walking toward the parking lot. "Duck down," he said as he started the engine, "unless you want to have a conversation with them right now." She slid down in the seat until her head was below the window line, feeling ridiculous but grateful. The engine rumbled to life and she felt the car start to move. They were actually doing this. She was actually escaping in a stranger's car while wearing her wedding dress. "Are they following us?" she asked from her hiding spot. "No, they're checking your car. Looks like they found it." He turned out of the parking lot and onto the main road. "You can sit up now. We're clear." She straightened up and looked back to see the hotel getting smaller in the distance. Her sister was standing next to her abandoned car, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling everyone in the family to tell them what had happened. The wedding was officially over, and there was no going back now. "So," he said after a few minutes of driving in silence, "do you want to talk about what just happened? Or should we just drive around until you figure out your next move?" She looked over at him, this stranger who had just rescued her from the biggest mess of her life. He had kind eyes and laugh lines around them, like someone who smiled a lot. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, and there was something calm about him that made her feel safer than she had in months. "I don't even know your name," she realized. "Jack," he said, "and you're obviously the bride who was supposed to be getting married back there." "Was supposed to be," she repeated. "That's exactly right. I was supposed to be doing a lot of things today that I didn't want to do." He drove them through the downtown area and out toward the quieter parts of town where there were small cafes and local shops, instead of fancy hotels and wedding venues. The further they got from the hotel, the easier it became to breathe. "There's a little diner about 10 minutes from here," Jack said. "It's quiet and they don't ask questions. We could get some coffee and figure out what you want to do next." Coffee sounded perfect, normal, something regular people did on regular days when they weren't running away from their own weddings in strangers' cars. "That sounds good," she said, "but I should probably warn you that I'm going to get some very strange looks in this dress. Trust me, I've seen stranger things. I photograph weddings for a living, remember? I've got stories that would make your head spin." She looked at him with new interest. "You're a wedding photographer? Were you supposed to be working today?" "Actually, yes. I was running late to a ceremony at your hotel. Turns out I had a good reason to be late, or I wouldn't have been in that parking lot when you needed an escape route." The irony wasn't lost on her. She had run away from her own wedding and crashed into the car of someone whose job it was to capture other people's happy wedding moments. Life had a weird sense of humor sometimes. "Do you like it? Photographing weddings, I mean." He was quiet for a moment, like he was really thinking about his answer. "Some of them, yes. When I can see that the couple is truly happy. When they're marrying their best friend and can't wait to start their life together. Those are the good ones. And the bad ones? The ones where I can tell through my camera lens that someone is making a mistake. Where the smiles don't reach their eyes. Where the families are more excited than the couple. Those are harder to watch." She understood exactly what he meant. Her engagement photos had been beautiful, but looking at them later she could see the truth in her own face. The smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The way she leaned slightly away from James instead of toward him. "You probably could have told I was making a mistake just by looking at me today," she said. "I don't know. I never got the chance to see you at the altar. But the fact that you're here instead of there tells me everything I need to know about how you were feeling." The diner came into view. A small building with a neon sign and big windows. It looked exactly like the kind of place where nobody would care if you showed up in a wedding dress with a story to tell. Jack pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "Once we go in there and sit down, you're going to have to start making some real decisions about what comes next." She looked at the diner, then back at the road that led to the hotel and her old life. Her phone had stopped buzzing, which probably meant her family had given up trying to call her and had moved on to more drastic measures. They were probably worried sick. They were definitely angry. The guests were probably being sent home with awkward explanations, but for the first time in months she felt like herself again. Sitting in the stranger's car wearing a wedding dress but not getting married. Having no plan but feeling more free than she had in years. "You know what?" she said, opening the car door. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next. It can't be worse than what I was running from." As they walked toward the diner entrance, her in her elaborate gown and him in his casual clothes, she realized she was actually excited to see what would happen next, and that feeling alone told her she had made the right choice. The bell above the diner door chimed when they walked in, and just like Jack had predicted, they got some very interesting looks. She couldn't blame people for staring. It wasn't every day you saw a woman in a full wedding dress sitting down for coffee at 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair, didn't even blink when they asked for a booth in the back corner. She just grabbed 2 menus and led them to the quietest spot in the place, away from the other customers who were trying not to be obvious about their curiosity. "Coffee?" the waitress asked, and they both nodded gratefully. Getting into the booth while wearing layers and layers of wedding dress fabric was like trying to solve a puzzle, but she managed to squeeze in across from Jack. The dress took up most of the seat and spilled onto the floor around her feet. She probably looked ridiculous, but for the first time all day she didn't care. "So," Jack said once the waitress had brought their coffee and left them alone, "do you want to tell me what happened back there? I mean, I can guess, but I'd rather hear it from you." She wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug and took a sip, buying herself time to figure out where to start. "How do you explain to a stranger that you just realized you were about to marry the wrong person in front of 200 people? Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life?" she asked finally. "Every day for about 2 years, he said without hesitation. "That's actually how I ended up becoming a wedding photographer." She looked at him with surprise. "Really? I used to work in an office. Corporate job, good pay, benefits, everything my parents thought I should want. I wore a suit every day and sat in meetings about things that didn't matter to me. I was engaged to someone who looked perfect on paper, but felt like a stranger when we were alone together." The similarities to her own situation were startling. "What happened?" "One day I was walking to work and I saw this street musician playing guitar on the corner. There was something about the way he looked while he was playing, like he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. I realized I had never felt that way about anything in my life." "So you quit your job?" "Not right away. But I started taking photography classes at night. Turns out I had a good eye for it. The more I learned, the more I realized that capturing real moments, real emotions was what I actually wanted to do with my life." "And your fiancé?" Jack stirred his coffee slowly. She didn't understand why I wanted to give up everything we had planned together. She loved the life we were building, the house we were going to buy, the future that looked so perfect from the outside. When I told her I wanted to start over, do something that actually made me happy, she said I was being selfish. "Were you? Being selfish?" "Maybe. But I think there's a difference between being selfish and being true to yourself. If I had married her and kept that job, I would have been miserable. And eventually, that misery would have made her unhappy too." She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "That's what I realized today. Standing in that bridal suite, looking at myself in that mirror, I knew I was about to promise forever to someone I didn't really love. Not the way you're supposed to love the person you marry." "What's he like?" "Your almost husband. James is a good man. Really, he is. He's reliable and stable and kind. He remembers to pay bills on time and never leaves dishes in the sink. He's everything a sensible woman should want. But we never laugh together. We never talk about our dreams or what we want our life to look like in 10 years. We talk about practical things, safe things. I can't remember the last time he surprised me or made me feel excited about anything." Jack nodded like he understood completely. "My ex used to say that love wasn't supposed to be exciting all the time. That real love was quiet and steady and predictable. Do you think that's true?" "I think real love should make you feel alive, not sleepy. It should make you want to be a better person, not just a more responsible one." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping their coffee and thinking about the paths their lives had taken. The diner was filling up with the late afternoon crowd, but their corner booth felt private and safe. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead. Do you ever regret it? Giving up that stable life? Jack smiled, and she could see those laugh lines around his eyes getting deeper. Not once. My life is completely different now, and yeah, sometimes it's harder. I don't make as much money, and I don't have all the security I used to have. But I wake up every morning excited about my work. I get to capture the best moments of people's lives. And I met someone last year who loves me for who I actually am, not who she thinks I should be. You're with someone now? Anna, she's a graphic designer. We met at a coffee shop where she was working on a project and I was editing photos. We started talking about art and creativity, and I knew within 5 minutes that she understood me in a way my ex never did. There was something in his voice when he talked about Anna that made her heart ache a little. It was the same thing she had been missing with James, that spark of genuine connection and excitement. That's how it should be, isn't it? She said quietly. That feeling of being understood? I think so. Life's too short to spend it with someone who doesn't get you. Her phone, which had been silent for a while, suddenly started buzzing again. She glanced at it and saw her mother's name on the screen. Then her father. Then James, then her sister. They were all calling now, probably frantic with worry. I should probably call them back, she said, though the thought made her stomach turn. They're probably imagining the worst. What are you going to tell them? That was the question, wasn't it? What could she possibly say that would help them understand why she had done what she did? How could she explain that she had just saved herself from a lifetime of quiet unhappiness? The truth, I guess, that I couldn't go through with it because it didn't feel right. And what about James? She thought about James standing at the altar, probably confused and embarrassed, having to face all those guests and explain that his bride had disappeared. She felt terrible about hurting him like that. But she also knew she would have hurt him much more if she had gone through with the wedding and spent years pretending to be happy. He deserves someone who can't wait to marry him, she said. Someone who gets excited when he comes home at night, not someone who just feels relieved that the day is almost over. Jack reached across the table and touched her hand gently. You did the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, with all the mess and the phone calls and the explaining you'll have to do. But you saved both of you from years of being wrong for each other. She looked down at his hand covering hers and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a little flutter of possibility, of connection, of maybe there was something better out there waiting for her. So what happens now? She asked. Now you figure out what you actually want your life to look like, and then you start building it. 3 months had passed since that day at the diner, and she was sitting in her new apartment looking through a box of photographs that Jack had given her. They weren't wedding photos or posed pictures with fake smiles. These were real moments he had captured during their friendship, images of her that showed someone she barely recognized but loved instantly. There was one of her laughing at something he had said during a walk in the park, another of her concentrating while she helped him organize his photography equipment, one of her reading a book at the coffee shop where they had started meeting regularly, sunlight streaming through the window and catching her hair. In all of these pictures, she looked genuinely happy. Not the polite, careful happiness she had worn like makeup for years, but real joy that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. It was like looking at a different person, someone who had been hiding under all those expectations and safe choices. The apartment was small, but it was hers. She had found it 2 weeks after leaving James, when she finally worked up the courage to have that difficult conversation about ending their engagement. He had been hurt, of course, but not as surprised as she had expected. Later, he admitted that he had been having doubts too, but hadn't known how to bring them up. Her family had been harder to deal with. Her mother had cried and asked her what people would think. Her father had worried about the money they had spent on the wedding. Her sister had been angry at first, thinking she had lost her mind over some kind of pre-wedding panic. But gradually, as the weeks passed and they saw how much lighter and happier she seemed, they began to understand that she had made the right choice. Even her mother eventually admitted that she had never seen her daughter smile as much as she had been smiling lately. The job at the local magazine had been Jack's suggestion. He knew the editor through his photography work, and when she mentioned they needed someone to write articles about local events and businesses, he had recommended her. It wasn't the kind of writing she had dreamed about doing when she was younger, but it was writing, and for the first time in years, she was using words to tell stories instead of just filling out spreadsheets. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Jack's name appeared on the screen and she found herself smiling before she even answered. "Hey, are you ready for tonight?" he asked. Tonight was the opening of his first art show. Not wedding photography, but the personal work he had been doing for years. Pictures that captured the real beauty of everyday life. Street scenes, portraits of interesting people he had met, landscapes that most people would walk past without noticing. "I'm nervous for you," she admitted, "but excited too. Your work deserves to be seen by more people. Anna helped me pick which photos to display. I think you'll like her. She's excited to finally meet you." There it was again, that warmth in his voice when he talked about Anna. She had met Anna once, briefly, when she had stopped by Jack's studio to drop off some prints. Even in that short conversation, she could see why Jack loved her. Anna was creative and funny and kind, and the way she looked at Jack made it clear that she saw all the best parts of him. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she had met Jack before he met Anna, if that day in the parking lot had happened when he was single. But mostly she was just grateful that running away from her wedding had led her to a friendship that had changed her life. "I'll be there," she said. "I wouldn't miss it." After they hung up, she went back to looking through the photographs. There was one that always caught her attention, taken about a month after they had first met. She was standing in front of her old car, which still had some of the white ribbons from her wedding day tied to the mirrors. But in the photo, she wasn't looking sad or regretful. She was laughing, and her hand was on the car like she was saying goodbye to an old friend. That car had represented so many things to her over the years. Freedom when she was younger, then later a reminder of dreams she had given up. On her wedding day, it had been her escape route. And now it was just a car. Practical transportation that got her to work and to the grocery store and to coffee dates with friends. She had changed jobs, changed apartments, changed almost everything about her daily life. But the biggest change was how she felt about herself. She had spent so many years trying to be the person everyone else wanted her to be that she had forgotten who she actually was. Underneath all those expectations, the writing job had reminded her that she loved telling stories. The friendship with Jack had shown her what it felt like to be truly understood by someone. The time she spent alone in her little apartment had taught her that she actually enjoyed her own company. She wasn't dating anyone yet. A few people had asked her out, but she wasn't ready. She wanted to be completely sure of who she was and what she wanted before she let someone new into her life. She had learned the hard way what happened when you tried to build a relationship on top of uncertainty about yourself. But she wasn't lonely. For the first time in her adult life, she felt complete on her own. She had friends who really knew her, work that challenged her, and a future that felt wide open instead of already decided. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Saw your article in the magazine about the new art gallery. Really good writing. Proud of you." Simple words, but they meant everything. Her sister had been the most critical family member after the wedding incident, but she had gradually come around to supporting the new life her sister was building. She looked at the clock and realized she needed to start getting ready for the art show. She had bought a new dress for the occasion. Nothing fancy or formal, just something that made her feel like herself. It was blue and simple and comfortable, the kind of dress she could move in without worrying about how she looked. As she got ready, she thought about that day 3 months ago when she had stood in a hotel room wearing a wedding dress that cost more than she made in a month, feeling like she was trapped in someone else's life. If someone had told her then that running away would lead to the happiest few months of her adult life, she never would have believed them. The art gallery was busy when she arrived. Jack's photographs were displayed on white walls with good lighting, and people were walking around with wine glasses talking quietly about the images. She found Jack near the back of the gallery, standing with Anna and looking nervously at the crowd. "How does it feel?" she asked him. "Terrifying," he said with a grin, "but good. Really good." She looked around at his photographs, images that captured moments of real life and real emotion, and felt proud of her friend for having the courage to share his vision with the world. "You know what I realized?" she said. "Running away from that wedding wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of it." Jack smiled and squeezed her shoulder. The best stories always start with someone being brave enough to change everything. And looking around at the gallery full of people appreciating authentic art, standing next to friends who truly knew and supported her, wearing a dress that made her feel like herself, she knew he was absolutely right.